Okay, all good now.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Jason Pickering. I work with the Global Implementation Team, the HIS Center and DHIS2. Today we're going to talk about data integrity and some of the new features that have been introduced in recent versions of DHIS2. There's still a few people joining. We've got about an hour. We'll see how much time we take. I don't know if we're going to need absolutely everything. The plan, I think, is for me to give a kind of brief presentation of some of the features, how the metadata integrity checks now work in DHIS2, particularly after version 39. I then want to do a demo of the system in action using the Sierra Leone database. And then I think it would be really good if we could maybe have a discussion around some of the challenges that you guys face with metadata integrity, and also a discussion around some of the approaches that we can use to fix the problems that the metadata checks actually uncover. Feel free to stop me at any point in time by raising your hand, and yeah, I'll take your questions directly. So just want to keep it informal and interactive as possible. So feel free to stop me if something is not clear or requires more clarification. So I'll start with this was a presentation that I sort of recycled from the HISP Asia conference that was back in, I guess, October of last year, where we discussed metadata integrity checks. This is basically a completely from the ground up re-implementation of the system. I know that probably many of you may have attempted to use the old data integrity check, particularly on version, or let's say less than version 39. There were many problems with the way that it was implemented. It was frequently extremely not performant. Certain checks would run, but a lot of times things didn't run. We've even seen instances where the process itself either crashed the server or made it such that the server was incredibly loaded, basically. So it was very CPU and memory intensive. These checks were implemented in Java, and they just did not scale very well. So with the help of the backend team, particularly Jan Burnett and David Mackesy, we have been working over the past, I don't know, maybe 2.5 years or so in sort of completely redoing this from the ground up. The new checks after version 39, so version 39, 40, 41, they basically all been written for, I don't want to say all, almost all of them. The ones that we could, let's say, replace with SQL-based checks, we have done that. There are still certain checks that are basically impossible, or at least impossible for me to do in SQL. Those are things related to, for instance, checking syntax of validation rules, program rules, indicators, those types of things we have to do in Java, basically. So some of them we have left in the way that they were implemented before, but the vast majority of them we have replaced with pure SQL-based checks that generally run much quicker on real production databases. We've also added many checks that we felt were missing. And when I say we, I mean sort of the global implementation team has collected a lot of these SQL scripts over the years, looking for anomalous metadata. I mean, just a very trivial example would be like organization units that have trailing spaces. So it's really easy to write an SQL statement to look through the database and figure out all of the organization units that have trailing spaces. And so we've collected a lot of these SQL statements over the years, looking for things that were basically metadata integrity problems. And we've taken a lot of that and sort of recycled that into this new metadata integrity system, so that everybody can benefit from it. All of the checks are written with YAML, which is yet another markup language. It's very similar to JSON, except it's a little bit easier on the eyeballs. And the reason that we did that was that we felt it would probably be a lot easier for implementers, database administrators, to be able to run the SQL directly in their database if they needed to do that. I'll just maybe go to the source code where you can find all of this. And it's in the main source code repository, in services and administration. And I know that I'm going really, really quickly, but you can just search for this if you're interested. But I just did want to show one of them basically. And here's an easy one. So categories with no options. So you can see that this is a YAML file. So it's fairly straightforward to read. We wanted to be able to allow people to basically copy this out, maybe go to their database. See, zoom in a little bit. So just can copy out the SQL here. Let me go back to our database and we can paste it in. And we can execute this SQL directly in the database. This could be quite helpful, for database administrators and DHIS2 administrators. Instead of having to work directly inside the user interface, it's also possible to work maybe directly on the database as well. So this YAML basically provides us a way to standardize all of the checks, make them relatively easy for human beings to read, but also simultaneously gives us enough structure so that we can pull this into DHIS2 using Java. Yeah, as I mentioned, as you saw from that file, that was a check for, what was it, categories with no options. That doesn't really make sense. You have a category, it should always have category options. The checks are written in SQL, and they sort of come in two flavors. One is a summary, and the other is the details. I showed both of those very quickly in the terminal, but we'll come back to that in a minute. One of the other really great features that the backend team was able to implement for us is extensibility. So in addition to all of the sort of standardized checks, these are standardized in the sense that we felt that they would be applicable to basically all DHIS2 implementations. Those are the ones that are currently available, but it's also possible to implement your own. And I'm going to go later on in the presentation into a bit more depth about how to do that. So I know that I think we were just really supposed to talk primarily about the feature itself in this presentation, but I did just want to briefly mention some of these root causes of why metadata integrity issues arise to begin with. It's very important to keep in mind, I think, particularly if you're going to undertake attempting to solve some of these problems, why does it happen to begin with, and how can we prevent it from happening going forward? One issue is the changes of the DHIS2 metadata over time. And what we've seen from working with a number of countries over the past couple of months is that particularly instances that have gone through many upgrade cycles, maybe they started 10 years ago using DHIS2, many times they have more problems than, say, newer instances. And part of that is because of the changes to the metadata model over time. There have been changes, and in certain cases, older databases have more problems than newer databases. Changes in the DHIS2 instance over time is another reason. What do I mean by that? Well, basically creating new metadata. So, adding new data sets, adding new data elements. The system is dynamic. And of course, as you add more things to the system, there may be the possibility for these types of integrity issues to arise. One other sort of problem that we've had in the past that's increasingly being solved is kind of a weakness of validation of metadata during import. And what I mean by this is that, when you're importing metadata, a lot of times the importer doesn't always check for things holistically. It checks for certain things, but it may not check for everything. A lot of those problems we have identified and are working on fixing. But there are still issues that may lead to data integrity issues or metadata integrity issues from importing metadata. Lack of standard operating procedures for metadata management. This is probably a very common one that you may have come up against, but basically it involves users creating metadata potentially in the system and then sort of abandoning it. Oftentimes we see people, may create a category or category combo for testing purposes, and it's often done in production. And then it never gets used. And so it ends up sort of just being there, but actually not doing anything. And over time, this can create problems. Yeah, I mentioned sort of experimentation, dev work being done on, or testing being done on production. We know that this is fairly common, and not everybody has the ability to clearly separate, development work and production work. There aren't always great ways to migrate your metadata from, say, a development instance into a production instance. And so some of this development work that may be necessary when you're developing a new data set or a new program, some of these metadata artifacts may sort of be left. And over time, they build up and may become abandoned, may begin themselves to cause integrity issues. Another problem is the collection of outdated artifacts. And I'm sure that probably many of you, particularly if you administer your DHIS2 instance, have seen that the number of users, dashboards, visualizations continue to grow over time. So somebody creates a new dashboard, maybe they use that dashboard for a while, they roll off the project, but the dashboard's still there. Nobody has access to it, but it's still in the system basically. So it's kind of a metadata object that's there, and it's kind of abandoned. And same thing with visualizations. It's very easy and cheap to create a visualization, put that on the dashboard, but it's much more difficult to kind of remove all of that once the use for it is no longer there. So with that in mind, we'll just maybe jump right into the new user interface for the metadata integrity UI. This is available in, I believe, in version 41 and above. You will need to also update the maintenance app in order for this user interface to be present. But I am also going to show you in a sort of stopgap app that we have developed that will also enable you to use the same data integrity API in versions 39 and 40. But in versions 41 and above, we have this great new UI that the front-end team worked with us on. I'll just show it maybe live, since it's probably better. It's available in the data administration. Sorry, I said maintenance. I should have said data administration. But this is data administration, not the maintenance app, and it's here in data integrity. So maybe I can go to full screen. So it's pretty straightforward. One other great feature that we have is the ability to run these checks individually. That was also not possible in the older implementation. You basically had to run everything, or you couldn't run checks individually, basically. So it was not possible to run things, maybe some of the checks were very fast, but one of them was very slow. And this meant that you wouldn't be able to get any information whatsoever, basically, if the service wasn't able to complete in time. We've tried to make this a lot quicker, both because these checks are based in SQL. They run directly against the database. So that should speed things up very significantly. And we've done basically everything that we can to make these standard checks to run very fast. You can see that, obviously this is a very trivial one. It completed in less than a millisecond, whereas other ones, may take a little bit longer, basically. In testing on like real live production databases, it's generally been the case that all of the standard checks do run quite quickly. And by quite quickly, I mean in less than a minute. Your mileage may vary. Of course, it's going to depend on what kind of hardware, what kind of system that you have. But in general, most of these checks should run very quickly, at least the standard checks. We also have these so-called slow checks. These checks have to be run individually. They cannot be run, at least from the user interface, they cannot be run in bulk. And the reason for that is that they tend to be slow. And they may be slow for different reasons. This one, aggregate data elements with no data values. The reason that this is slow is that, well, we've got to look at all the data values, right? So if you've got 50 million, 150 million data values in your system, that's a lot of data to process, and it may take time. This is the Sierra Leone database, so there's not a whole lot of data, so it runs very quickly. But all of these, we basically believe that they should be run individually because they may take some time to complete. Some of the other ones that are slow, like indicators with invalid numerators, this is one of the Java-based checks, and these also need to be run individually as well. Not all of these are actually very slow, but we felt it was better to be conservative, at least for now, with these, because we have seen in the past, particularly in systems that have a lot of tracker indicators, program rules, this particular check, program indicators with invalid expressions, can take a very, very long time to run. So it's generally smarter to run these individually. And that also allows you to kind of focus on a particular problem. That's also, part of the reason why we felt it was maybe better that they could be run individually. And maybe we can just simulate that right now. Yeah, we can maybe take this one, right? Category options with no categories. So this is the summary. This will give you the number of particular problems that have been identified. All of the checks also come with a kind of opinionated severity. I say opinionated because we've tried to do the best that we can in terms of recommending what is more important and what is not so important, and also situations that it may be a bit of a gray area. And what we mean by gray is that not all of these problems are always sort of right or wrong. There can also be particular circumstances that require you to sort of triage the issue and determine whether it actually is a problem. So for all of these ones that are warnings, this could be a problem, but it may not really be a severe problem. It may not actually cause anything to go wrong with DHIS2, but it should be something that you should potentially contemplate fixing. Other ones, yeah, like this one. Periods with the same start date and period type. This is sort of a critical problem. This should never happen. You should never have periods in the system, like 2 monthly periods, basically. Um, this shouldn't this shouldn't be possible, but we've definitely seen that in certain circumstances, this can happen. This is a critical problem because this can actually cause analytics to fail if this situation happens. We haven't seen it very often, but we have seen it in the past. And so a lot of these checks that you will see, you may wonder why they're there. And as I mentioned, we've kind of collected all of these over the years. And in certain databases, we may have seen a particular problem that maybe has only occurred a handful of times. But we felt it was better to go ahead and include them, mostly because they're so cheap, basically, to run. They're quick, and it's better just to go ahead and run them. So yeah, I talked about the severity. I want to go back maybe and then show you categories. Yeah, category options with no categories. We've also made a sort of best effort approach to link back to the maintenance app. I'm not sure this is going to work, but in this case it did. Let's see. Yeah, so we actually were able to click on this particular category option, and we got led to the maintenance app. The reason that we wanted to do this was to allow the administrators to kind of get a better idea about, what is this? Is this a real issue? I can triage it maybe if I can look at the category option. In this case, it's category option called blue. This is not part of any other category, basically. So this is just a category sort of on its own, category option on its own. But by linking into the maintenance app, you can sort of take a look at the particular metadata in question and make a determination as to whether you want to go ahead and resolve the problem, basically. So in this case, we can maybe give it a try and see, you can find that category option. And we can go ahead and try and delete it. Okay, so it looks like we got rid of it. So if we go back now to data administration, oh, it's here actually. This was also kind of our thinking here to run these checks individually. I can just rerun this particular one. I don't need to rerun absolutely everything. I can just be very selective about it and run that particular problem. So we could go back to green and we say, okay, we want to get rid of green as well. And I think the other one was yellow, maybe. Yeah, get rid of that one. Now we can rerun everything, and well, we've only got one left to enable gender equality. So this kind of workflow should allow you to sort of quickly triage the issues, as well as, sort of go back and forth between the maintenance app, figuring out if you need to, solve the problem, basically. So you don't have to rerun absolutely everything. You can just be very selective about what you want to run. I'll pause there for a sec, take a little bit of water, and see if there's any questions or comments before I move on. Nope. All right. So that's the UI. We've got our standard checks, slow checks. I think we've discussed pretty much everything there. Yeah, as I mentioned, each check consists of a summary and details. Each detail lists individual metadata objects. It's also important to keep in mind that in some cases, the actual problem is not the metadata object itself. And what I mean by that is particularly around some of these, like, um, find the organization units. Yeah, organization units, not in all compulsory organization unit group sets. Basically, we've also tried to explain what this means. And this is a situation where you have an organization unit group set like ownership, and a facility should either be public or private. But some of them are not. Like this one is not either public or private, according to the integrity check. The problem is that the actual issue is not here in the organization unit itself, but is actually part of the organization unit group, right? So that particular organization unit is neither in public or private in this group set, in the facility ownership. So we actually need to add it to either, the private or public facilities. So again, the linkage from this UI back into the maintenance UI is done on a best effort, but it may not always give you exactly what you need to solve the problem. It may be enough to give you a little bit more information in terms of what this particular metadata object is about, but it does not always give you all of the information that you might need to actually resolve the problem. I did want to spend some time talking about extensibility through custom checks. This was a really great feature that we sort of tacked on. And I think it really gives individual implementations a lot of possibilities to write their own integrity checks, ones that may be very specific to your instance. I just came up with a few examples here. And these are not necessarily always applicable to all instances. And that's part of the reason why we haven't implemented them, because, maybe not every user should have a valid email address. There certainly are instances of DHIS2 where all users should have an email address. And you could think about creating a custom check for that. And I'll show that in the next slide. But there can also be much more specific types of things. Naming conventions. We know that in many cases, there may be particular naming conventions that you use for data elements or indicators. And so you could contemplate creating a integrity check to check for that. So I think a good example of that, I know that in South Africa, they prefix all of the organization units with a 2-letter sort of province code, and all the organization units should follow that convention. They should always begin with 2 lowercase letters followed by a space and then followed by the actual name of the organization unit. So you could create something very specific for your instance. As an example, on the next slide, I'll show you how to do this. This is detailed in quite gory detail in the user manual, so I won't go through absolutely everything here. It's quite well documented in the manual about how to create these, but I'll just go very quickly in terms of how it should be done. I mentioned this example that users should have emails. Again, this needs to be a sort of YAML file, and you can just sort of cheat if you want and take some of the ones from the main DHIS2 source code repository and modify them. YAML is very picky about spaces, unlike JSON. So all of the indentation and spaces must be exact. That's why it can be easier just sort of to take one of the templates that we have in the source code and make your modifications there. All of the fields are required. It's a little bit more complicated. Not all of the fields are required, but all the ones that I'm showing here are required. So the check should have a name, should have a description, should have some section related to what type of metadata object it is, in this case, users. This order is really not so important. This is basically something that we had previously to figure out where to order the checks. So it's not really important. You can just give it a number. This is really the meat, though, is that there are two pieces of SQL here. One of them is the summary SQL, and the other is the details. For the summary, it should always return basically a count and then a percent. And you can see here that this is actually the SQL select UID and username from user info where email is null. So this is going to give us all of the users with their UIDs and the username that don't have an email. And then we can use this sort of common table expression CTE and then recast this into the form that's required. So you have to be very precise about this. Java requires that, it has to be in exactly this way. It has to be a number. It has to be called value. This also needs to be a number, and it has to be called percent. But you can take a look at some of the ones that we've created in the source code if you're interested in creating your own. And then these will be loaded up at startup. I'll show an example of this. So that's the summary SQL. The details is very similar. The only difference there is that we actually provide the UID and the detail, basically. So this is the same SQL query, UID, username from user info where email is null. And then we just select this, and we can test this, on our own database. You can give it a warning, and then, of course, the introduction and recommendations. So you can give this a try. There's plenty of examples there in the GitHub repo. I was going to try and see if I can get my terminal. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, this is the one that we created. Users should have emails. So this looks very similar, to what I showed in the slide. We've got the summary SQL, and we've got the details SQL. This has to be installed in your DHIS2 home directory. This again is documented in the documentation, but basically you need to create a file that's called custom data integrity checks.yaml, and it needs to look like this. Yeah, so it's just a very simple file that starts with checks, and then you can create any kind of directory structure that you want inside of this custom data integrity checks. So here I put it in users. You could create something else, for, I don't know, like that. So you might have multiple different directories. The important thing is that in the YAML file for your custom checks, you just have to list all of them basically and tell the system where they're located. So you can see here we've got a custom check and it's in users, and your user should have an email. So when you start DHIS2, this now should become available as a custom check in the system. Let me see if it's there. User roles, I think it's not in this one. Okay. Yeah, it started up it's not available on this particular server, and running a bit short on time, so I think maybe I won't go through that process. But this should work in terms of defining custom checks. Any questions about that? Okay. The other thing that I did want to cover is I know that not all of you are working on, say, version 41. We do have a custom app available in the App Hub, and you can just go to the App Hub and search for metadata integrity. You'll see this. So this should work on version 39 and version 40. It's not necessarily on 41, but if you're on version 39, the backend system is there, but there isn't any kind of user interface for it. So this is kind of a stopgap app that should allow you to access these checks. You can see that the UI is not as great, but basically the functionality is more or less the same. We can run the metadata integrity checks again, and we can get the details for these. You can see they're listed in this table. You can refresh them individually as well. And you can search. Oh, that one actually did show up here. Users should have emails, so it is there, actually. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the sort of yeah, stopgap app for 39 and 40. It's also available, these are also available from the API if you want to go that route. Data integrity summary thing. Yeah. Here you can actually see the, the actual API if you want to write your own app or use this for other purposes. And the last thing that we have as well, let's see, data integrity, I think it's this one. No, it's not there. Okay, maybe it's not on this version. Yeah, so that's the API and the app basically. Well, I think that's about it really, in terms of the new metadata integrity checks. Any questions? You guys have been very quiet. Okay, well, that's really all I have, I think. We haven't used all of the time, but we have gone for 40 minutes. But if you do have any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Nora. Yeah. Yeah, just Nora, on your comment, I do want to give homage to our dear colleague Kale. I spent a lot of time talking with Kale about this. Actually, just a couple of days before he died, we were having a long discussion about something. So he inspired a lot of this work actually, and pushed us quite hard to implement different checks. So yeah, he will definitely be missed. I hope that all of you will, if you have particular checks, once you're able to use the system, maybe you can feel free to suggest new ones if you have an idea that you feel like is not there. Callie had many of them, and I was able to get to some of them, not all of them. Yeah, feel free to either create a Jira ticket or ping me on Slack if you're there. Thanks, Nora. Yeah, we have a scenario where the facility is classified by primary health center by type, faith-based, by ownership, and categorized as non-functional. As a result, the classification triggers data integrity issues during checks. Currently, we're leaving it since we don't consider it a critical issue. However, we would appreciate recommendations on how to address this matter. Yeah, so it's hard for me to say exactly what the problem there might be, James. I don't know why or exactly. You mentioned that the classification triggers a data integrity issue, but I don't know which one. I assume it's the one related to organization unit groups. Um, the general rule there is that, for all of the, maybe we can just pull that up, that particular one. That was, so that's this one. Organization units not in all compulsory organization unit group sets. I think there's also another one. So there's two sides to this. One is when they don't belong to all of the compulsory organization unit groups, group sets. And in this case, basically they haven't been classified as either public or private. If you have a group set called ownership, should either be public or it should either be private. But in this case, it's neither one of them. There can also be situations, and this is a different check. I think this is for category options. Sets. I don't know where that one is. We should have one for that. Yeah, this one. Organization units which belong to multiple groups in a group set. So in this particular case, all of these belong, it's hard to say exactly until we looked at the details. But GOLU, MCHP, it's probably classified as being both public and private, right? So that's not quite the same as not belonging to any group, but it's also possible that it's being classified as being both public and private. This is a bigger problem. Well, actually, they're both problems. And the reason is, of course, when you go to the data visualizer and want to use this dimension for facility ownership, if the organization unit is none of these, it's not going to show up in the analysis basically. But if it's both public and private, we don't really know which one is going to show up. It's sort of indeterminate basically. It's sort of chosen at random, if you will, by Java when the analytics tables are created. So that's the underlying problem. I don't exactly know, and I guess maybe you don't have a mic, and if you do, you can feel free to maybe provide more detail. But it's either, that should be that particular issue. It's either a member of more than one group within a group set, or is not a member of any groups within a group set. Those are kind of the two possibilities. It should always be a member of exactly one group within an organization unit group set. Oh, yeah, David. David McAtee is, thanks for joining, David. David is one of the backend developers that has provided a lot of help with this. And so, yeah, he said, I'd like to say a big thanks for the fantastic work done building up this catalog of checks. It's a valuable part of the system. Yeah. Thanks, and we really appreciate all the support that we've got from the development team. Okay, any more questions?
James
Yeah.
has indicated where the problem is further down in the chat.
Sorry, Nora, I didn't understand exactly what you said there.
James has indicated the problem further down in the chat. He says it's organization units violating exclusive group sets. I think functional and not functional, maybe they aren't exclusive. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, exactly. I think you're on the old, I think, which version are you on, James? Right. Okay. So as I mentioned in version, all of what we've been talking about today is in version 39 and above. So for version 338, all of those are the old Java-based checks. And I think in this particular issue, if I remember correctly, in 338, which I don't always remember correctly, I think there may not have been a distinction between organization units which were not part of any group and those which were part of more than one group within a group set. But it's one of those problems. I think what you can do, James, is that if you actually dig into the source code of DHIS2 and find this particular problem, let's see if I can get rid of this chat. And in the organization data integrity checks, let's see, probably be in org units. Most of these checks should work on 338. Not all of them. Some of them might require a little bit of tweaking in order to get to work. But I think it's probably this one, compulsory organic groups. And so what you can do, James, is that if you're on 338 and you have access to the database, you can just go in, you can find the SQL, you can open up your database basically. And you can just paste that SQL directly into it, right? And so, yeah, we saw this one before, Adonkia, CHP. Let's see maybe what the problem with that one is. Might be easier through the API. And what was the UID? Okay, so we got data sets, programs, organization unit groups, right? See if I can find the square bracket ID name. Okay, so this one, it looks like it's only a member of urban, right? So if we go back to the maintenance app, and we look at our group sets, okay, we have urban and rural, right? It's compulsory, it's a dimension. We have facility type. So it doesn't look, it's hospital, clinic, CHP, or MCHP, or facility ownership, which is either private, NGO, mission, or public. So I don't know. Let's just see if we can fix this. We'll maybe make it a public facility. And this one. Okay, so we can make it a public facility. And then the other one was type, I think, right? Maybe let's refresh it one more time and see. So it's public, it's urban, and what was the other group set? Okay, maybe we'll just give it a CHC or something. Okay, so we'll make that. So now we put that into the correct group sets. So maybe we can run the SQL again. Okay, and we don't see that one anymore, right? It's missing from the integrity check. So it looks like we fixed it. So for 338 or even older versions, a lot of the SQL should run on older versions of DHIS2. In many cases, the only thing you may need to change is potentially the name of the table For example, it used to be called data element category option. I think now it's just called category option. So those very, very small types of changes you should be able to make by yourself, even though this SQL is for version 41 and above, or 39 and above. Many of them will also work on older versions. So maybe you can give that a try, James, and see if it solves your problem. If not, feel free to create a Jira ticket for us. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Anything else that you guys would like to see that now that we've given you kind of an overview of what the metadata integrity system can do, is there anything else that you feel like is missing that you'd like to see us add? Maybe any checks that you may have in mind that we haven't thought of in the last 5 minutes or so? Okay. All right. Going once, going twice. Can you check for leading blanks in data element names? Yes, you can. Let's see. I think that so we do have one for organization units that should not have trailing spaces. Organization units should not have multiple spaces in their names. I think what you're asking for, Nora, is it possible to check for leading blanks in data element names? We actually have not implemented a data integrity check for that. It sounds like maybe that's a good idea. We could definitely do it. We do have some other tools to help out with this that we're not necessarily going to go into in this particular webinar. But yes, we do have ways of looking for leading, multiple, and trailing spaces in all metadata objects, not only data elements, but across all the different types of metadata, from indicators to organization units, you name it, basically. So it's not in this data integrity checks because the reason that we didn't do that is that it can become there's so many different types of metadata, basically, that implementing that particular check for every single metadata object, we would have ballooned the number of integrity checks by a huge amount, basically. But we do, the implementation team has developed a small tool to help database administrators. Yeah, exactly. So it causes problems with alphabetical sorting. Yeah, so we know it's definitely an issue, and yeah, we can definitely provide more detail to you and others. Maybe just find us on Slack, Nora, and we can give you more detail about how to solve that particular problem. But we should definitely probably think more carefully about extending, leading, trailing, and multiple spaces to other metadata objects. That sounds like a good thing that we should look into, because right now it's very limited in terms of what we have. It's just organization units. All right. I don't have anything else unless you guys have any more questions or feature requests or other comments.
I can't be the only person who thinks about these things. I mean, outside the core team, please, everybody, chip in. And I'm not even a techie.
Yeah, you spend a lot of time with Kale, so Yeah, I think you
Do you
think
mind?
about it probably a lot more than others.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I mean,
it would definitely be good to hear from some more people. But that's fine. We can have another session if you want to maybe go into individually how to solve the problems. That's something that we didn't spend a lot of time on. In this particular webinar, I wanted to focus primarily on identifying the problems. What we haven't gone into is actually how to solve them, right? That's a whole different can of worms, if you will. But we can definitely think about maybe having some more webinars on how to solve some of these problems, if that would be useful for you guys.
uh, I think so, Jason, because it's one thing to identify them, and some of them are relatively easy to solve.
Mhm.
But I think the others perhaps need a little bit. The examples you've got here of organizations should not have multiple spaces. That one's easy to fix up.
Yeah,
But the ones that are slightly more you have to think about. I think that something like that, depending on what everybody thinks about, would be useful. I mean, I just come from a perspective of, what colors hammered into my head, 25 years ago. I mean, it doesn't go away.
yeah.
Um, yeah, which makes me, when I look at various databases, want to cry. But that's my problem. It's no one else's problem. So, Jason, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the session, and I feel that the data integrity checks and data quality are so interlinked, that and we need to pay, a lot of attention to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've particularly over the past, say, 6 or 7 versions of DHIS2, the data integrity just basically hasn't worked, particularly on very large databases. We've seen it in many instances where it just did not work at all, basically. And so people kind of say, okay, well, if it doesn't work, then I'm just not going to worry about it, right? There's nothing I can do about it. So that was one of the major motivating factors for the complete reimplementation, so that we could make it very quick, make it very fast, so that people can check this more regularly. But absolutely, we need to do more in terms of providing tools and ways of solving the problems. We didn't go into this. David Mackesy, who was with us on the call, he may still be there, one of the backend developers, has been doing also a lot of work on um, merging and deduplication of metadata objects, such as organization units. We know that's a very common problem. When you have two facilities that have almost the same name, in many cases that we see that some people may create a facility that is only distinguished by a trailing space, for instance. So it actually is the same facility, but you have these sort of duplicates in the system. And other instances where category options, systems may have multiple default category options. I think that's not this particular database because it's serially owned, but we do have checks for that. We definitely have seen in many databases that there are multiple default category options. And so the backend team has worked a lot on developing solutions to merge these duplicates. Um, so it's an ongoing process. We want to make it a lot easier for you to both to keep an eye on it as well as to solve the problems. I mentioned sort of briefly in the beginning of the talk standard operating procedures, and this often is part of the problem, that changes are made directly in production without ever having tested it. But particularly now that the checks are working, we feel like it should be a lot easier for you to do all of your work in a development environment. Be sure that the metadata is okay, that there aren't any metadata integrity issues before you move it to production, because once you move it into production, it can become a lot more difficult to fix there. That's kind of the long-term thinking. I think we're out of time. Thanks for joining, and I'll turn it back over to you.